The opponents of the Medicaid expansion say, well, we can't afford to pay for these added costs, but if we reject the Medicaid expansion, as you said, we're still paying for those costs. Uninsured people still go to the emergency room, they still go to the doctor, and so the insured people eventually pay for those costs, so we're going to pay either on the front end or the back end. And another problem with rejecting the Medicaid expansion is that federal money doesn't go to Nebraska, it'll go to Ohio or Florida or Michigan or the other states that have adopted the Medicaid expansion. So Nebraska tax dollars that could have stayed here at home to help our people are going to go help people in other states, so it's completely counterintuitive.
Well, if I'm going to pay for somebody's care, I'll either pay for it directly or indirectly. Indirectly through my premiums. So I'm going to pay higher premiums to pay for the uncompensated care of other people, or I'll pay some with maybe some tax adjustment, or maybe not. Maybe you hold back on some other program. You know, I balanced that budget 8 years, and we didn't have. We got rid of for people with disabilities, developmental disabilities. We didn't have a waiting line. I mean, we didn't have the problems in Beatrice. I mean, it's called management. If you manage your state and you don't find out, for example, under the low-income heating program, LIHEAP it's called, that $20 million or something like that went out to people who were deceased and or wasn't paid out. You either manage the government and find ways to make it work within this tax structure, or you stand on the sideline and say, oh me, oh my.
I think Governor Heineman, he's just more into politics and positioning himself to look good. He's not really interested in actual governing. I mean, he might as well take his old job back as executive director of the Nebraska Republican Party the way he operates. As we know, last week in the Nebraska legislature, there's a right-wing filibuster of the Medicaid expansion. You ever seen anything like that before during your time as governor, as a U.S. senator in the unicameral?
Well, you know, there have been filibusters. I've never gone back and looked at the history, but you know, Senator Chambers has found ways to filibuster in the past, but it wouldn't have been on this issue necessarily. So now I think it's just part of the current temperament of the legislative process. You see it in D.C. With recently a filibuster, seeing it out here. That comes about because people aren't willing to try to find that common ground.
Another topic is the 2011 debt ceiling bill created the current sequester. And the original intent was the sequester was supposedly never going to happen. The super committee was going to pass a bill reducing the deficit, but now because of the failure of the super committee, we're seeing delays at airports. There's a slowdown of economic growth. Doctors are turning away cancer patients who are on Medicare. Why did you vote against that bill in 2011?
Because I thought it would lead to exactly what's happened, that we would end up with a sequester. That the super committee would be dysfunctional, and it was. That we were only kicking the can down the road, we weren't solving anything. That we do need to have cuts in some spending. But as it turns out, the sequester is the cut, and it's the worst way to cut. People who think it's a good deal that the sequester went through will not think that it's a good deal when they want to travel. If they're watching the news right now, they're seeing that there are delays caused by reduction in air traffic controllers. If you're going to cut something that's across the board, it's across the board, and so consequently, there's going to be other pain that the people are going to experience as a result of this. Now, cutting is always going to be painful. But it's a question of where do you cut and how do you go about doing it. The military is going to struggle with this. There's no question the military can do more with less, as it always has. But you can't have half an airplane. So to just do it the way it's being done is wrong. It's just not the way to run a government, and it's certainly not optimal. Even if cutting is desirable, it has to be done in an important but appropriate fashion.
I'd like to remind our viewers that in 2011, all Nebraska Republican congressional members of Congress voted for the sequester. It was voted for by Joe Hans, Fortenberry, Lee Terry, and Adrian Smith. They all voted for that bill. They own that bill. And what's interesting now about the Republicans on the sequester is they say in general and in the abstract spending cuts are good, but then they condemn every spending cut caused by the sequester and blame President Obama for it, even though most of them voted for the sequester.
Well, that was bound to be the outcome, because I knew the super committee would not be able to take the political heat to come up with the cuts. There was a lot of discussion about Simpson Bowles, and that had a lot of good parts to it and a lot of bad parts to it. But you know, sometimes with these major issues, that's what you get. Sometimes I remember pushing a tax bill when the Supreme Court threw out the business personal property tax to get the people to vote for it, to reinstate it in some limited fashion, and I said that it was a solution that stunk the least. Sometimes you have to decide what is least painful, or where can you support the pain versus where you're going to get it in any event. So it seemed to me that there was never going to be a better time to decide the issue on cutting than back then in 2011, and I predicted the outcome that we had, wanting to be wrong, but I wouldn't participate and be complicit in the effort.
Is there any way out of the sequester in 2013? Is there any solution that can happen?
Well, obviously there could be, but there won't be. Nobody's going to touch it. It's become a third rail right now to touch it, because if you don't cut here now, you know, where are you going to cut? And I think people will be too confused to be maybe totally aware of what's happening. Will just be more frustrated by additional cuts or something like that. We had an opportunity to get spending under control and get a trend going, because the spending at the present rate, even with the sequester, is unsustainable, and it can't just be done with taxes. There has to be an effort to get your budget under control. Now, I think there's truth in the idea that we can help grow our way out with prosperity. But you can't get prosperity with runaway spending, and you can't get prosperity if you just keep increasing taxes. So a combination of those things is what I think most enlightened people seem to be saying. But now, while there's cutting going on, it's in the worst way. So how's that going to benefit us and get us into prosperity if we're suffering the way we are in such an odd way?
Yeah, President Obama and the Senate Democrats believe in a combination of tax increases and spending cuts, to reduce the deficit. That's how President Reagan did it. That's how George Bush 41 did it. That's how President Clinton did it. I mean, we know how to reduce the deficit. We've done this before. You can't do it all through spending cuts or all tax increases, as you pointed out. Another very important issue pending now in the Congress is comprehensive immigration reform. This issue has a long and tortured history. When you were serving in the U.S. Senate during George Bush's second term, there was actually a serious bipartisan effort made in 2007 to pass a comprehensive immigration reform, and then with the 2012 election results, the Republicans did very poorly with Hispanic voters, and so some Republicans are feeling some pressure to implement some kind of comprehensive immigration reform to, try to rectify their terrible problems with the Hispanic voting bloc. What is the future of comprehensive immigration reform in Washington right now, to the best of your knowledge?
There are a couple of good things that are happening. They have made some progress on securing the borders. Having secure borders is very important, because it's not just about good people coming across to work. It's about gang members coming across, drugs, violence, and there are bad elements that we have to do everything we can to protect the American citizen from. But once you understand that we really are moving toward that secure situation, then what do you do with people here? The federal government's not going to implement 84-year-old extradite, send off, deport 84-year-old grandmothers or or 10-year-old kids. They're just not going to do that. So some realistic solution has to be found. Now, what do I think the future is? First of all, I applaud Senator Schumer for moving forward and trying to put together this gang of 8 to discuss the issue. They went down, they toured the border, they're not ignoring the border. For a while there, it was that the border seemed to be partisan, that it was only the Republicans in favor of it. Was not really the case. I think this establishes that you can have a bipartisan view that securing the border is part of the overall implementation and comprehensive approach. I don't know whether, I want to be hopeful about it, but realistically, when you have the far right not willing to take anything, and maybe the far left saying it's not going far enough, it may be very difficult to get the requisite votes. Maybe you can get them in the Senate. I don't see how you can get them in the House. As long as it's it's worse than a hot potato. It's kind of issue that will cause a lot of angst in a lot of Republican House members for their next primary.
You know, it really depends. I think there's a majority of members of Congress favor immigration reform right now in both the Senate and the House. It all depends upon whether or not the Republican leadership in those bodies will allow an up or down vote. In the Senate, of course, you have the abuse of the filibuster by the Republicans. I mean, I think clearly there's a majority of senators that favor immigration reform, but can you get to 60? I think the chances for getting to 60 in the Senate are actually pretty good.
Well, that's what I say. I think the Senate might be able to pull it off, but I don't see the House doing it. I don't most like to be looking down at the House, but the numbers and the way in which its rules allow it to work and prohibit it from working is a factor you always have to take into account.
It really comes down to, in the House, to John Boehner whether or not he wants to scrap the so-called Hastert rule. Under the so-called Hastert rule, the House will not allow an up or down vote on a bill unless a majority of the Republicans will vote for and support the bill. And on a few recent prominent pieces of legislation, Boehner has scrapped the Hastert rule and allowed an up or down vote on the fiscal cliff bill, the Hurricane Sandy relief bill. I'm still hopeful that John Boehner can see the overall problems with the GOP's tarnished national image. He might just let the bill go through in the hopes of helping their position with Hispanic voters.
Well, that means that he'll have to make a decision so that a lot of his caucus will fall on the sword in their next primary.
Well, here's what the Hastert rule allows him to do is all the Democrats would vote for comprehensive immigration reform. A handful of Republicans would vote for it, but most Republicans would be able to vote no and protect the right flank in the next primary. That's what scrapping the Hastert rule might lead Boehner to do and might allow them to pass it.
As long as we're speculating, it's that handful that keeps him in power. He loses the handful and he loses the majority. So, you know, the calculus is constant. And what probably is disappointing, not only me, but most people that I talk to, is that calculus is always in play. The calculus of what's going to happen in the next election outweighs the policy of the legislation that's being considered. You know, I had people making that calculus about my vote on the health care bill. They said, oh, you know, he can't win the next election. I said, look, it's not about the next election. It's about the last election. I was elected to do certain things, and I'll worry about the next election at another time, but I'm not going to spend my immediate 6 years worrying about the next election when I've been elected to do something for 6 years, not for 12. So, but there are those who have to calculate what will happen to them in their next primary on their side. I was told by Red where I couldn't run again because I wouldn't win. Well, we did a poll. That wasn't the case. It wasn't going to be a runaway, but it wasn't the case. That there would still be a sufficient Democratic support, independent support, and enough enlightened Republicans, as always, for a Democrat to continue to be elected and re-elected.
I think history will vindicate your vote on Obamacare. As I said earlier in the interview, I think 10 or 20 years from now people will like it. And what's interesting, in the last election cycle, Democratic Senate candidates in North Dakota and Indiana ran on their support of Obamacare, pointing out the benefits to seniors, the elimination of the Medicare donut hole, over 6 million young people being put on their parents' health insurance policies. They ran on those benefits, and they won on that issue because they put their opponent in the position of saying, I want to strip health insurance from millions of young people, I want to increase prescription costs for seniors, and they won on the issue, and I think you could have won on the issue too.
Absolutely. You know, I go back to 2009 and 10, and think about all the money that was spent on ads, about $8 million on ads, not one of them telling anybody what was good about the legislation. They were told what was bad about it, and there were outright fabrications about it. They had Sarah Palin calling about the death panels, and all this misinformation that was out there had people hyped way beyond what you would expect under normal conditions. So if you went to the context at the time, there's no question that the majority was opposed to the legislation, but they were opposed to the legislation they were told that was there.
Exactly.
They kept asking, have you read it? The answer is, I did read it. I read the entire piece of legislation. Now, were there some surprises in it? Sure, there have been some surprises. Things that didn't, there's always surprises in legislation. Not all of them are intentional surprises. Something develops. That's why you clean up legislation afterwards. Very often you have another bill to come in, a manager's agreement to come in and then straighten out a lot of things. That's not been possible, really, with the environment. But the interesting thing is, if that $8 million had been spent telling people actually factually what was in the legislation, I think there would have been a much different attitude toward this.
I agree. In the 2012 cycle, President Obama and Democratic members of Congress running for re-election explained and defended the Obamacare program, and most of those Democrats won their elections once the voters understood what benefits were in the bill.
Well, the thing is, truth travels at the speed of sound, lies travel at the speed of light.
That's an excellent point. What is the Republican Party's future that you see on the national level? We've discussed the influence of billionaire money and the danger that these political dangers these Republicans face of a far-right challenger in the primary. What are those implications for the future of the Republican Party on the national level, Senator?
I think they'll adjust to it, but they're going to have to. I think there will be a time when the moderates will win out because people will be tired of the libertarian approach, the far right approach. They'll just say enough's enough. They'll see what a sequester situation does. They'll see a lot of other unfortunate results, and they're going to say that isn't the way I want my country to be. I want my country to be inclusive, not exclusive. And there's nothing inclusive with the Americans for Prosperity. The Crossroads, Karl Rove. He's trying to be inclusive by bringing in moderates and supporting moderates and stuff like that. And of course, moderate by his definition may be different than yours or mine, but it's exclusive. It's not inclusive. It's not trying to find in things that are better for everybody. They're special interests. That's all they are anymore. Special interest group of their own. They're more than they are elected representatives of their state and for the country.
Senator, what can the Nebraska Democratic Party do to restore a two-party system in Nebraska? Between the 60s and the 90s, we had a healthy two-party system in Nebraska. You won 4 statewide races. Frank Morrison won some races. Jim Exon did. Bob Kerrey did. We had a Democratic House member twice in the second CD. What can the Nebraska Democratic Party do to restore us to a healthy two-party system in Nebraska?
Well, I think we ought to keep our wits about us, for one thing. And I think trying to find, I've always felt that the Democratic Party may not always be right, but it's always trying to be on the right side. And if we continue to support the right causes and support the right positions, I think time will win out. It isn't going to happen immediately in the absence of a gaffe on the part of an opponent or something like that, if it's just a straight-up election. But if we have candidates that go out and try to find a way to unite people, not divide them, not take divisive positions that are way off the chart, but try to find ways to work with people and help everybody understand that the best way to get things done is to work together, promising that, as opposed to the divisive nature of the wrong math, the wrong political math. I think it will happen. It will happen. But that's what it's going to take. And candidates are going to have to raise money today. It's the ghost in the machine at the moment. It's as bad as that is to have to admit that, it's going to be very difficult because the other side will be well funded. And we're in an electronic, using the social media is also an important way to do it. It's an effective way to do it. And at some point, maybe broadcast costs, which are extraordinary, and as the use of the broadcast media may not be the way that it develops in some time in the future. So finding these new technological ways to get the message out, the right message, aggressive at it, trying to reach across the aisle and bring people together, finding things that unite rather than divide. That's how I won, and I think that's how. There's nothing magical about that. That is a recipe that can still work.
We are using the social media a lot more heavily at the Nebraska Democratic Party. It's just a matter of time until this interview is up on the social media,
Sure.
Senator. And here's an interesting thought I have. I've talked to a number of Democrats, and I share this opinion. I think that Fox News and the right-wing media are a real problem for us as a party in the rural areas. That is the true mainstream media in that part of the state. And they just tell outright lies about who we are and what we stand for. What can we do as Democrats to counteract those lies about us in the rural areas from Fox, Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, and the other entertainers in the right-wing media?
Well, it's not going to be easy because they have access into the living room. But if we stay active at the grassroots level and we get to the issues, I think the far right will run its course. I think it'll run its course, but we can try to help it do that a little bit with our own message and our own efforts to be there. But what we really need to do is make sure that our message is strong, understood, and is delivered across the state. In 1994, when I got reelected governor, I carried all but 2 counties, and I only lost those 2, Garden County and Sheridan County, only by a few votes. I always like to point out, when I was running in the primary in 1990, in one of the counties, I got all but 2 votes in a primary. And if I had gotten those 2 votes, I could have always bragged, I got all the primary votes in one county in Nebraska. I think there were only 14 Democratic votes cast that I got, 2 that I didn't.
Well, thank you very much, Senator. That concludes the interview. It's been a complete honor and complete pleasure.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you very much
Thank
for your
you.
time this morning, Senator. We look forward to working with you and staying in touch in the future.
And what you do and your enthusiasm is part of what it takes to build this party. And I can't thank you enough for your willingness to do it and to take the responsibility that goes along with your position, but also expanding what you do way beyond what could be expected of you in your position.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Senator.
Thanks.